We're in Matthew, but we're moving up to chapter 6. So I commented in Sunday school, we talked about the Lord's Prayer a little bit. That's actually where I was headed when I got into all this, but then I realized all this is kind of the forerunner leading up to his teaching us how to pray, because without the background of it, it doesn't mean as much. So, of course, Jesus has been telling it, or we've been studying where Jesus was telling his followers about his kingdom. And he started by describing the character of the kingdom. And what the kingdom welcomes the spiritually bankrupt, and those who are deeply disappointed with life, and those who just can't do it on their own. It's a kingdom of justice and mercy at the same time. And those who belong to the kingdom are ambassadors of peace, even though they're persecuted in this life. They let people see the good in their lives so that others too will come to know God. And then from there, he went on to basically his code of conduct for the kingdom. And he was telling us that it's not enough to just conform to God's rules in our external behavior. He wants us to change on the inside. He wants us to resolve our anger, to restrain from sexual desires that are outside of bounds, to refuse to divorce just because we don't want to be married, and to be truthful inside and out, to forgive those who wrong us, and finally, to love those who are not on our side. And now as we move into chapter 6, we're looking at our motives for worship. So people perform acts of worship for many reasons. But those who belong to the kingdom need to watch their motives. It's not just an issue of what we do to worship God. It's the reason why we do that's critically important. And Jesus introduces this idea in Matthew chapter 6, starting with verse 1. And he begins with a general principle and then follows it with 3 examples. So first we'll look at the general principle, verses 1 and 2. It says, "Take heed that ye do not your alms before men to be seen of them. Otherwise ye have no reward of your Father which is in heaven. Therefore, when thou dost thy alms, don't sound a trumpet before thee, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have glory of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward." So kind of to paraphrase that, it says, be careful when you're doing your acts of righteousness before men to be seen by them. If you do, you'll have no reward from your Father in heaven. So if we think back about what we've already studied in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus was talking there about righteousness. And it's good behavior of those who want to follow him, those who belong to the kingdom. So in last chapter, he said that if we want to be in the kingdom, our righteousness needs to be better than the performance of those people who do the right thing on the outside, but don't do the right thing on the inside. So God wants us to follow him, not only with our behavior, but also with our heart. So now he says there's something else we need to watch, and that's our motives. When we do good things, or acts of righteousness, we need to make sure we're doing it for God and not just to put on a show for the people around us. We get our word theater from the word used here as seen. So when he was saying in those verses that we do our good works to be seen of men, he's talking about our putting on our theater. in our day, just like in Jesus' day, there are people who do good religious things, not because they're devoted to God, but because they're interested in looking good in front of their fellow human beings. So how can we look good or look like a good guy? Or that was actually a question. How can I look like a good guy to my neighbors and my friends? Some people go to church. Some give to the poor. Some say their prayers. Some give up a bad habit for Lent. Sometimes people are motivated to do these things because they want to impress God. Sometimes they do them also hoping to impress somebody else, some human, and hoping that they'll notice how good of a person. Maybe they're trying to impress their pastor or a fiance or a husband or wife or friends or parents or children. So religious stuff looks good on a resume. So everybody ought to have some giving on their resume. But Jesus says that if we're involved in a lot of religious activity just to show people how devoted we are to God, then it doesn't mean anything to him. That's not what it's about. Don't do good things so that people will see you doing good things and think that you're a good person. So, and this kind of brings up a contradiction between what we were looking at back in Matthew chapter 5, verse 16, which says, "Let your light shine before men that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven." So remember when we were talking about that, it said that we should be good people doing good things, and we should let people see us doing good things. So that will draw them to a relationship with Jesus. But here, it sounds like the opposite. So we need to be careful not to do good things for people to see. But that's not but it's not a contradiction. Actually, the Bible's saying both. These two verses are really talking about two different ideas, and the difference is very important. We should do good things so that people will see them and give praise to God. But we should not do good things in order to show off to other people so that they praise us. It's really a question of motive. The first brings praise to God, and the second brings praise of people to ourselves. That's a huge difference. So the general principle that Jesus is trying to teach us, if we perform religious acts to impress other people, then we'll miss God's reward. So if our motives for going to church or for doing some good deed or helping the poor or praying to God to perform performing some religious duty, if we're doing these things to impress the people around us, then it doesn't mean anything to God. It's always easier to understand a general principle when we have an example. So in the next few verses, Jesus gives us 3 examples to illustrate what he's talking about. They're giving, praying, and fasting. Now, in Jesus' day, these 3 were seen as the 3 great things a person could do to demonstrate their devotion to God. So if you really love God, then you show it by giving to the poor, by praying, and by fasting. So Jesus says, let's not just talk about what you do to show your devotion to God. Let's talk about why you're doing it. Let's talk about your motives. So today we're going to take the first example and talk about giving. And then over the next few weeks, we'll look at the other 2 examples, prayer and fasting. So first, how does this general principle apply to giving? Well, verse 3 would look at it as ostentatious giving. But when thou dost alms, that's the first part of verse 3 here, or to paraphrase it, So when we give to the needy, Jesus is talking about giving in general. He's specifically talking about giving to people in need. The word he uses here can mean doing something kind for someone else, but most often in the Bible, the word was for money, so given to people in need. Usually that means poor people who don't have enough money. It includes beggars looking for a handout. It includes the handicapped who, because of their injuries, weren't able to earn a living. Because even today in the Middle East, it's pretty common to see handicapped people begging in the streets. So I think these verses are referring to what we give to people in need. So, for example, that would include giving to church so it can help families who are out of work or people that are having financial crisis in their lives. It also includes what we do when we spend as individuals to help others in need. It includes things like sending a contribution to feed people through Convoy of Hope. It includes whatever we hand out the window to a homeless person. It includes our donation to things like the Pregnancy Center. It includes at least a portion of our taxes, that little part that goes to helping the poor. It includes supporting kids like Tiana and her mission trip. And all these things would be giving that Jesus is talking about, giving to those in need. And although this word's often used for financial need, I think it's broad enough that it can also include other needs as well. For example, think about the money you can give or that you give to the church that we use to help other people. If we charge people for the services they receive from church, it could be pretty expensive, more than a lot of people could afford or would be willing to pay. But support for the church allows us to offer ministry to everyone for free. And this is giving that meets the needs of people in need. And that's what Jesus is talking about. But I don't think he's talking about everything we give at church. We know every one of us gets something out of church, or I hope we do. We all grow spiritually and get encouragement. We learn. We get a cup of coffee. We enjoy the heat. We make some trash and dirty some carpets. In other words, some of what we give to the church is money that gets spent on ourselves. We're really giving money to pay for some benefit that we're getting out of church. Kind of makes me think, I heard a story about a little 7-year-old girl that came to church with her parents on Sunday morning. She watched her parents and they sang, and then she sat and listened to the sermon and the pastor's prayer and all that, and she watched as the offering plate went by and her parents put a little bit in the offering. Then after church, as the family was driving home, the mom commented that she thought the singing was just awful. And the dad added that the sermon was not only too long, but it was boring. So the little daughter sat back in her seat and thought about it. And finally, after a few minutes, she said, "Well, Mom, Dad, you got to admit it was a pretty good show for $1." So some of what we give is just paying for whatever we get out of this experience. But I hope that's not all we're giving. I hope that we're giving more to the church than what we're getting out of it, more than what it costs the church for us to be here. Because whatever we give beyond that is money that is given not to meet our needs, but to meet the needs of others. And that's the kind of giving Jesus is talking about here in this verse. And that's the kind of giving that brings God's reward. Now, I know some people can't afford to give, and that's fine. Definitely not something we are to worry about. We have many other things we can do that affect the people around us, And God's put us here both to benefit from this church and to benefit others, even if we can't afford to give. So what I was saying is, for those of us who have made the church our spiritual home, and that can afford to give more to the church than we receive from it, if we can give that, then I hope we do. Now, I'm not saying this because I want anything out of it, obviously. It's because God honors that kind of unselfish giving that goes beyond just paying for what we consume and meets the needs of other people. The kind of giving that Jesus is talking about here includes a lot of different things. It doesn't include what we give to meet our own needs, but it includes everything that we give to meet the needs of others. So we can look again at Matthew 6:2 and see what Jesus is saying about giving to meet the needs of others. And verse 2 says, "So when you give to the needy, don't announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by men." There's really no evidence that people in Jesus' day actually blew trumpets to announce their giving. Jesus is using a metaphor here to colorfully describe the people who made sure that everyone knew that they were giving to the needy. Basically, he says, when you give, don't make a big deal out of it. Don't attract attention to it. Don't advise how much, or don't advertise how much you're giving, and don't show off your generosity. Jesus refers to hypocrites once again, and this is the word for an actor, someone who plays a role. Here, the idea is someone who is pretending to give because they care about the needs of people, or because they want to give as an act of worship, or as an act of worshiping God, but their real motive is to be honored by their peers. They want people to see how generous they are. They want people to be impressed with their spirituality, or their devotion to God, or their kind heart. But Jesus warns us not to follow their example, because God doesn't recognize their generosity, and He won't reward it. Well, the second part of verse 2 says, "I tell you the truth, they have received their full reward." Now, the word Jesus uses here is a business term. It means to be paid in full and issued a receipt. So those who give to impress other people get what they want. In fact, they get precisely what they want and no more. The reason for giving is to get human recognition. Then that's all they'll get, is human recognition. So if that's our motive for giving, then our generosity means nothing to God. We've earned nothing but human praise, and God owes us nothing in return. And this would be considered ostentatious giving, a religious act of worship designed to impress people instead of serving God. So we can notice the key elements in this type of giving are action. It's publicized giving, or tooting our own horn. Our motive, it's done for men's praise. And the result, the reward is paid in full. You received human praise. So by contrast, Jesus tells us in verse 3 how we should give to people in need. And verse 3 and the first part of verse 4 go on, "But when ye doeth alms, let not thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth, that thy alms may be in secret." Now this phrase, "don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing," essentially means don't even tell your best friend. So Jesus says that the cure for ostentatious giving is to keep it a secret. The word secret refers to a secret place. It is drawing a specific contract with it's drawing a specific contrast with the hypocrites mentioned before, who distributed their gifts in the public synagogue and streets where everyone would be sure to know what they were doing and even perhaps how much they were giving. So Jesus tells us to do our giving in secret, to keep it confident, or keep it confidential. The main reason we have an offering box in the back and don't pass a plate is so no one feels obligated to give. And we don't want people to be tempted to give to the church so that people will think more highly of them. And that's exactly what Jesus was talking about. Now, what would happen if we stood up each Sunday and thanked the major donors by name? Or what if we engraved bricks with the names of the people who gave the most and the amounts that they gave? You know, that wouldn't be illegal. May not even be considered immoral. But there's no doubt that it would make it more tempting to make a contribution only for the public recognition. But if no one knows what we give or how much we give, then there's not much temptation to give in order to get the praise of men. And that's the big problem in a lot of the churches today. They're always advertising the giving, and you give us $1,000 and God's going to give you back $10,000. Well, that's not really what the Bible says. I don't think this verse means at all that we must that all giving must remain confidential. And one day Jesus sat in the temple with his students, and together they watched how much people were putting into the collection. And when the widow came by and put in 2 small coins, Jesus drew everyone's attention to her gift and praised her for her generosity. Likewise, Paul praises the Macedonian church for their generous gift for the people, or the poor people in Jerusalem. And he boasts about the pledges that the church in Corinth made to the same relief project. So Jesus isn't laying down a rule. He's not saying that only secret giving honors God. He's saying that if we're tempted to give for the wrong motives, if we might be tempted to give so we'll look good in front of other people, then we can remove that temptation by doing all of our giving in secret. We can keep it confidential, and our motives won't be in question. So I think it's really important to be precise here in our understanding. Jesus isn't saying that we that we've done wrong if people know about our gift. He's not saying it's wrong if people are impressed by our gift. What he's saying is that it's wrong to give for the purpose of impressing people. It's not an issue of who knows about it or what they think about it. It's all about our motives. Why do we do it? For people or for God? So the reason it's so important to guard our motives in giving is because the reason why we give will determine how it affects our lives. So Jesus urges us to give in secret so that our motives will be completely pure. The last part of verse 4, he goes on and it says, "And thy Father which seeth in secret, himself shall reward thee openly." And those who give from pure motives will be rewarded by God. Now, and just what is this reward? And that was actually where I was thinking about the churches that say, give us 1,000 and God will give you back 10,000. But if we look in the King James Bible, we'll notice that it has the word openly. God will reward you openly. However, the word openly is not in the original text. God's reward could be open or it could be in secret. His reward could come now in this life or it may not come until later when we arrive in heaven. Or he could reward us both in this life and in the next. So Jesus doesn't promise a specific reward or mention a specific time, but he does say that we will be rewarded. The word he uses for reward literally means paid back a debt. And that's the way the Bible describes it. If you give to people in need with a pure motive, not for how it will look, but because we love God and want to honor him and obey him, then God will pay us back. I could go so far as to say God owes us. And that might sound crass, but Proverbs 19, verse 17 says, "He that hath pity upon the poor lendeth unto the Lord, and he that which he hath given will he pay him again." So giving to the poor is compared to loaning money to God. Paul says in 2 Corinthians 9, 6 through 11, that God will meet generosity with generosity. Verse 6 says, "But I say to you, he which soweth sparingly will also reap sparingly, and he which soweth bountifully will reap bountifully." And then verse 11 says, "Being enriched in everything to all bountifulness, which causeth through us thanksgiving to God." And he gives us a promise in Philippians 4, 18 and 19. It says, "But I have all and abound. I am full, having received of Epaphroditus the things which were sent from you, an odor of a sweet smell, a sacrifice acceptable, well-pleasing to God. But my God shall supply all your needs according to his riches and glory by Christ Jesus." So there's a reward for those who give to people in need. It may be more money. It may not. It may be repayment. It may be recognition. It may be now. It may be later. And the one who gives to the needy will be rewarded. But that reward is only for those things for those who give with a pure motive. Now we can see complete contrast between ostentatious giving and secret giving. Secret giving, our action, it's not public but private. It's confidential. Our motive, the reason for giving, is not to get recognition of men, but rather to honor God. And the result is not praise of men, but rather reward from God. So God wants us to give to meet the needs of other people. It's not because he needs our money. It's because giving to people in need is an act of worship. And that's why it's so important that we give with the right motive. If we make a huge contribution to the poor so that people will praise us, then all we get is people's praise. But if we unselfishly take care of people in need because we want to honor and obey God, then God will reward us. So the question is not just, are we giving? The question is, why are we giving?